Good morning. Hello. How's everyone doing today? We're back. Woohoo! What a great day yesterday was. Last night was great. My mom and I even practiced what I preach, and we ended up at Disneyland at 11:15. We got in 2 rides. Amazing, amazing, fantastic. Anyway, glad to be back. We have so much to be hopeful for. This panel that we're starting off with is really cool. It's really what it's all about, right? I talk about family strong. So this is it. Let me just cue up our music. See if I can do it today. Come on. We have with us Dr. Virginia Kimonis, Lauren Morgenroth, Ashley Yee, Laurie Miller, Leona Filis, Kelly Maynard, Marissa Penrod. Let's hear for our family panel. And I'll let you take it away.
Great.
Okay.
Okay. So my name is Virginia Kimonis. I'm a clinical geneticist and a genetic counselor at UC Irvine, just down the road. And the title of my presentation today is Strategies for Genetic Testing. And these are my disclosures. I am on the board of advisors for Pompe disease, and Sanofi have supported me for a Pompe disease exercise study, and I also run a Genzyme registry for various lysosomal diseases. So the role of the medical geneticist, as you are fully aware, has totally evolved with this era of genomic medicine. We no longer just diagnose patients. We are involved with understanding next-gen sequencing, which is testing that now everybody should be doing in Duchenne and other disorders. Understanding the role of disease modifiers. We have patients with the same mutation, but they're all different, and it's because of the different variations of those 30,000 pairs of genes that influence the dystrophin gene. Increasing molecular insight into mechanisms then avails ourselves of modern therapies, novel treatments. And we become interventionalists, conduct trials and novel treatments for patients with Duchenne and other rare disorders. So this is the way dystrophins pass down. As you know, it's on the X chromosome. Moms are carriers in about 70% of patients and in 30% of individuals. The mutation occurs as a new variant, and half a mother who's a carrier's girls will be carriers, and half of the boys will have Duchenne, as you know. So what's the value of a genetic counselor? So genetic counselors discuss results of genetic testing. This morning, for instance, at the experts panel, I was asked to try and interpret results of testing, which sometimes are very complicated. So really understanding what that mutation means is very important because it helps us understand, is this something that's transmitted in the family, or is it something that occurs as a new mutation? Is it something that would be amenable to certain treatments? We know Adalorin works with the nonsense mutation. Some of the exon skipping drugs need that precision in the diagnosis. Identifying other individuals who may not have been diagnosed correctly, testing them. We also help with prenatal genetic counseling and testing, and sometimes even pre-implantation genetic testing, which means testing that embryo to determine if that embryo carries that mutation before implantation. So this is the scenarios that we often faced with in the genetic counseling clinic. The family on your left is a family in which that gene is transmitted, and we know that mom's a carrier, and therefore there is a half a chance for that individual's children to carry that mutation. Whereas the family tree on the right, we don't really know because it could have occurred sporadically, and you need maternal testing to determine that. When we look at dystrophin mutations, about 65% are deletions, 10% are duplications, and 25% are point mutations. And those point mutations could be missense or nonsense, and there are, of course, many other variants as well. I do want you to be aware of free testing. There is no reason why anybody who is suspected of having Duchenne or Becker muscular dystrophy doesn't get testing done, or their parents or relatives get testing. It's all supported by, for instance, Sanofi, that supports the Perkin-Elmer Lantern project. A little bit of saliva sent off to the lab, and they give you the result within 30 days, typically. Or the PPMD Decode Duchenne project, which offers free testing again for individuals who are suspected of having muscular dystrophy, but also carriers within the family, like the mother, which would be the case in 70%. And typically, deletions and duplications are tested by whole genome sequencing. It's a very low read. You could do SNP arrays, which stand for single nucleotide polymorphism arrays, but a low read of genome sequencing will detect deletions and duplications. And if it turns out that there is no deletion or duplication, then you would sequence, and it's usually a much deeper read to understand the sequence to see if there is a variant identified. The two main types, as you're well aware, are Duchenne and Becker, and the differences are in Duchenne, it's typically an out-of-frame deletion and in-frame deletion. And I will remind you what that is. So on the left, just to remind you that 3 base pairs code for a codon. And if you cleanly delete the codons, then you get an in-frame deletion like you see on the left. And then on the right, it's an out-of-frame deletion so that the 3 base pairs go out of sync, and then you can end up with a nonsense mutation, and then there is a small protein formed, like you see on the left versus on the right. And then that small protein is unstable, you get decay, and you get absent dystrophin in the muscle. So I do want you to also be aware that carrier females are not really carriers anymore. We know that many of them have symptoms, sometimes as severe as boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. But on average, 10 to 20% of moms will have mild muscle weakness, fatigue, pain, and cramping. And exercise and pain medication is often required. They need to be tested for their own cardiac function, and 10 to 50% of carriers may have EKG and echocardiogram abnormalities. And psychological care is very important, and you will hear more about that. Women may feel sad, worried, or guilty. I mentioned that some individuals might be as severe as males, and that's because of skewed X inactivation. So women are mosaics, so only one of their X chromosomes are active, functioning. And if there is skewing in which chromosome is inactive, the one carrying the normal X versus the mutated X, then that woman could manifest as a male. And then germline mosaic carriers, what that means is that even if a mom is not identified with a mutation, she has up to a 10% chance of passing on the dystrophin gene to her offspring because that mutation resides in the gonadal tissue. And then we definitely recommend registering for the Duchenne registry for carriers. So in summary, what I presented to you was some genetic strategies for testing individuals and their relatives. You heard about genotype-phenotype correlations depending on the in-frame versus out-of-frame, and then missense or nonsense mutations, genetic counseling issues, and manifestations in carrier females. And I want to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share some insights into genetic testing. There are a lot of people that I owe a lot to, the funders, and hopefully there'll be questions at the end. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and I want to again thank the organizers, Deborah and Paul, for putting on this amazing conference, and a big shout out to Tiffany, who's done a fabulous job with keeping us all in check and sending us instructions ahead of time regarding this great framework of the F. So this morning in the family panel, I'll be discussing some of the decision-making that surrounds research. I am a genetic counselor, so I'm thrilled to be following a medical geneticist, but I will this morning put on my research hat. I work for TRINS, which is an organization that collaborates with sponsors and academic centers towards their management and coordination of their research trials. Some of our instructions with regard to who we are on the panel were to share with the room here today a little bit about ourselves. So many of you may recognize this individual in this picture. This is Billy Ellsworth, and he was my first patient. I joined the Duchenne community over 15 years ago, and I'm thrilled that he is my family now. And I followed him and his family throughout the course of his disease. And this is him at his high school graduation this summer. We had a great party, and it was great to be part of it. So regarding the family choices, some of them can be quite challenging when thinking about participating in research. And what I want to do this morning is challenge everyone to think of changing the way we view research for Duchenne and thinking about what has happened in pediatric cancer, where research is actually part of care. I was thrilled yesterday to hear Dr. Brenda Wong include in her 6 C's research. And so for me, that's critical for us to be able to move that needle forward and be able to make progress with the community. And so thinking about research, there's different types of studies, but there's also different considerations in terms of what is the study. What are some of the assessments that the patients will undergo? Are these assessments that are going to be similar to what you do in the clinic? Are these going to be maybe more invasive, where you're having a biopsy or blood draws? What is the frequency of the visits? How will this impact work? How will this impact the other family members in terms of childcare and other support? And what is the length of the study? Are we committing to something that's going to happen over a period of 24 weeks, or is this something that's going to be over the period of 5 years with extension studies? What are the risk benefits? And again, what is the location? Many of these new interventions that you hear about are in very limited centers because we have to keep the research very homogeneous and controlled, and so they tend to have very few centers for some of the different resources. Thinking about clinical trials, the way I've kind of separated them out is into clinical trials and observational studies. With clinical trials, really what's focused here on the design is hypothesis-driven. There's going to be a specific question that the researchers are trying to answer. What will drug A do to the pulmonary function test? Will drug B improve the distance that's walked on a 6-minute walk test? Those are going to be very specific questions that the researchers are going to try to answer. Typically, those studies tend to be smaller, especially in the early stages of that research progress when you hear about these phase 1s or phase 2s. And that's because you want to just test it in a small group of patients for safety. That's usually the first stage where you want to just make sure it's safe to then continue on to look for efficacy. So those endpoints will change over the course of the program through that research phases to, again, then look at efficacy. The length of the study may vary. Oftentimes they can be shorter because you're just looking at safety, but as you move into efficacy, some of the studies may last 96 weeks. And that goal is really to approve the drug. Versus observational studies that tend to not have many limitations, and they don't preclude you to participate in any other clinical trial. So I encourage everyone to consider participating in natural history studies, biobanks, registries. Those are very important, and they have shown in Duchenne to play a critical role with the advancement of the drug approvals. The Synergy Natural History, which many of you may have heard of or may have even participated, which again, thank you. I've been part of the Synergy network for over 15 years, and that has really changed the way we view the trajectories of Duchenne. this was done to have real-world setting of what the progression of the disease is. It was a very large study. It followed 440 patients, and it helped us try to understand what the differences were amongst patients. We are aware there's quite a bit of variability when patients have the exact same mutation. And so these studies may be longer, and in the case of the Synergy DNHS was 10 years. And these are really for information gathering. So I encourage you to look at clinicaltrials.gov as a resource to be able to see what research is available. When you consider research, the informed consent is going to be your #1 piece and resource that you have to look at. The informed consent is set up in such a way that has critical elements. The nature of the treatment will be one of the early sections. It will provide you with what are other possible alternatives, what are the risks and benefit, and you will always have an opportunity for questions. This is a conversation and a process that goes on throughout the course of participation. And it is something that you should go back to throughout that process so you can review what the expectations are to help your family guide you through kind of what to expect at that next visit. That informed consent will provide you with who you're meeting with, what you're going to do at each visit, how long the test will take, and again, what those risks are. If you have concerns or questions, it should also include a section for you to be able to contact somebody independent to that research study. So this will be a member of an institutional review board or something to, again, help protect your rights as a participant. The informed consent is also a way for the researchers to communicate new information or changes. So if they decide at some point to extend the study, this will be an opportunity to get a new informed consent to provide you information on what are those changes. It's always voluntary. You can choose not to participate, keeping in mind that there may be certain things you have to do with withdrawing from an intervention for safety reasons. So I just want to end this and encourage to share any questions you have about research and thinking more in a positive way. So I came about this really great way of thinking more positively in terms of hate has 4 letters, but love does as well. Enemy has 7, so does friends. Lying has 5, so does truth. Negative has 8, so does positive. Under has 5, so does above. Cry has 3, so does joy. Anger has 5, happy has 5, right has 5, wrong has 5, hurt has 4, and heal has 4. So think in a positive way and thinking about research to help get us drugs approved quicker and faster.
Very nice.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning. And for those of you coming into Orange County, welcome. I'm local here, and so I'm really excited that Tiffany invited us out to be here. For those of you who maybe are not, we'll go back. I lost my bio slide. So my name is Ashley. I am traditionally I'm a trained social worker, but I work at Global Genes. I'm the director of patient engagement, and we are an organization that's patient advocacy focused, and we work with all 7,000 plus rare diseases. So we really help looking from the patient perspective and focusing on what the whole rare disease community is being affected by, and try to build education and resources and events that surround those areas to help tackle those challenges. And in that, we get to work with a lot of really great disease-specific communities like the Duchenne community. So we're very excited to be here. We know Duchenne is also in our backyard as well, and so we love working with them in the local level. So again, my background is in social work, and I got my degree from USC. And while I work at Global Genes in more of a macro setting, I have a lot of experience from the clinical experience. Most of my experience comes from the field of autism, but I also have a lot of experience also in senior care, homelessness, as well as Alzheimer's and dementia. So today, I want to talk a little bit about navigating grief and loss, and I know that this can sometimes be not the most positive or happy, thrilling topic, but it can be a really great topic that if you haven't embraced yet, I really want to encourage that this is such a natural part of our life that if you haven't thought of this, definitely start thinking about it and know that everything is okay about this process. So to start, what is grief? Grief is just the natural response to loss, and a lot of times we feel we don't, loss doesn't always have to be necessarily death or a physical loss. Loss is personal to you, and there's no right or wrong way to experience this loss. I do want to just kind of disclaimer on the right and wrong part, that there is no right or wrong place because it comes from such an individualized place. But in a couple of my slides down the road, we'll talk about coping with those. And I do want to just put out there that if you are starting to feel feelings of a lot of anxiety or depression, that you should go and seek out more professional support. And that, again, there's no right or wrong way to feel grief, but there is a lot of support out there to help you process through that grief. So I do encourage that if you are having those feelings, to definitely seek out professional support. So a lot of people will talk about the Kubler-Ross model when they're talking about loss and grief. And so this is, I think, or some people really lovingly call it DABDA, which are the acronyms DABDA. So it's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So something about this model, which I think is a nice kind of baseline or a bread and butter of grief and loss, is that most importantly, this is not a linear process. You don't go through something in loss and feel like, oh, I'm in denial, and then you know 2 weeks later you're in anger. It doesn't really work like that, and it's not cyclical. You're not going to go through a cycle of these. You may get something, you may feel a sense of grief from a loss, and you may immediately go to anger, and then you may go to acceptance, and then you may circle back to bargaining or depression. So it's okay to fluctuate and move throughout the cycle. It is, again, not linear or cyclical. So don't ever feel like you need to have gone through all these. And likewise, you don't also have to go through each phase. If you feel like, oh, I've never gone through bargaining, that's okay. You don't have to. It's kind of the beauty in the model. There is also no timeline. So if you feel like you've been in one of these feelings for a bit of a longer time, that's okay. It's normal. So there is no designated timeline. There's no framework for any of this. And most importantly, and this is actually, I hate, it sounds weird, but this is what I love about the grief model, is that you can re-enter phases based on different points in your journey of grief. So if you're experiencing grief, say as a child, you're going to experience it really different than maybe how you have to revisit as an adult. And it's actually quite important, if you're experiencing grief or loss, that you actually revisit these feelings quite often throughout your life, because there may be subtle things that trigger your loss or your feelings of grief throughout your life. So well, maybe, for example, in the cancer community, if you lost your child to cancer, you may have gotten to a point of acceptance, but you may start to have those feelings again maybe when your other children go to college, because now you have to revisit the fact that maybe one of your children never got there. So it's okay to revisit it, and how we process our life stages is also going to depend on how we process our grief. So how you process a child will be really different from how you reprocess it again as an adult. And so it's really important to constantly try to revisit this in order to make sure that you're always kind of getting to a place of closure or ability to move on through this process. So a lot of times, especially in the rare disease community, we see a lot of things about anticipatory grief. And so this is the expectation or anticipation that loss is going to occur. Or if sometimes you're not the patient yourself, you may feel preparatory grief. So again, this is just that you're preparing for a potential loss. And again, loss doesn't have to be physical. Loss can be a milestone. Loss can be even a job. So for many of you, you may have had to give up your job in order to become full-time caretakers. Experiencing that loss of maybe a different part of yourself is still considered a loss. And everyone experiences loss, not just patients, but also caregivers, immediate family members, siblings. We all have it, we all experience it, and we all experience it through different ways besides just physical loss or just from the patient themselves. So when in this anticipation, you again may feel that model come through, but it's also important that even though you anticipate it and you may find some sort of acceptance or closure in the anticipation, you again will probably have to revisit again once you actually experience the loss itself, because how you prep for it is going to be really different from how you experience it when it's actually occurring. And so kind of in this whole idea of grief, I think there's this big push to really think of everything wellness, grief, all from a holistic view. So really looking at it from this wide perspective. Again, grief is really unique to the individual. We all experience it differently based on our communication styles, our personal relationships, our life stages, how we've grown up. They are all going to change how each of us experience grief and loss. And as a family unit, kind of bringing it back to the idea of this family panel, is that as a family, remember that each person in your family is experiencing this process unique to themselves. So don't feel like my husband or my wife or my daughter or my son all need to experience the same thing I'm feeling. It's important that everyone processes it on their own and how they want to. It is truly unique to the person. And so obviously, a course can't talk about loss and grief without coping. So what are some coping abilities? So again, coping, just like everything else, is going to be unique to the individual. It depends on who you are, where you are in life, and who you are maybe in the family unit or in your relation to the person that it's most affecting. So again, it all depends on how you cope. But coping can help you come to terms with the loss. It doesn't make you forget the loss, though, and that's so important, I think, when it comes to loss. It just helps you come to terms with it and eventually gives you the strength and ability to move forward from it. But it doesn't mean that you'll ever forget it. So don't ever feel like because I've somehow had closure means that I'm okay and I've accepted and I can forget about it and pack it away. You can always revisit, and a lot of times you hear, and especially in the rare disease community, people move on by living, for a legacy. And that's always great, especially I work in a community with lots of rare diseases where unfortunately there's many terminal diseases out there. And so many parents feel like, honoring the life of their children or their loved one is how they cope and move forward. So again, never to forget, but just to help move forward. And again, like I said, coping is individualized, and this will have to do with whatever is going on in your personal life, whether you're a teen, adult, child, etc. So ways to cope is, of course, self-care, support groups. Many people turn to their faith and religion. Education is a great way to cope, learning more about the disease community, getting involved with it. And of course, like I said, therapy. This is a really big one to me, is that if you are, again, validation that it's okay to feel how you're feeling, but if you start to recognize the signs if you're going to a place where you feel like you need more professional support. Don't be afraid to reach out to those around you, to reach out to support groups, other family members, to help you through that process. It's incredibly normal, and you shouldn't be afraid to reach out to them. But again, it's very individualized and incredibly unique. So, if you're sitting here and this is resonating with you in your own way, which I hope it does, know that I want to just validate all of that for you, that anything you're feeling is absolutely normal. But again, work towards always moving forward with that ability. So.
Hi, everyone. Excuse me. My name is Laurie Miller. I'm a clinical social worker at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. I work in the MDA clinic and also the general neurology and also neurosurgery. And I graduated from USC as well. Yay. So I've been working at Children's Hospital for about 4.5 years. It'll be 5 years in December. And I've been with the MDA clinic the entire time. So I'll tell you a little bit about what my role is at the hospital, in the clinic. So I provide support. I see patients aging from ages a year, even younger, to 21 years old, who've been diagnosed with the chronic medical condition, which can include muscular dystrophy, and a lot of times that's what I do in the MDA clinic. Also, I work with children with epilepsy, neuromuscular conditions, brain tumors, hydrocephalus, anything that has to do with neurological. And a lot of times, I'll have a family come in, or a patient and family, who have just been diagnosed or have been dealing with the diagnosis for many, many years, and just started coming to the MDA clinic. And I am there to provide support to not only the child who's going through the medical condition, but also through the diagnosis, but also to the entire family. Because a lot of times I will sit down with my patients and their parents and their siblings and remind them that that all of them are affected in some way, and that my role is to provide support to all of them in terms of how they're coping. And as was shared in the previous talk about grief and loss and how they're doing in school and where to go from here once they've gotten the diagnosis, or just wanting to know what to do next. I also link patients and the family to different resources out in the community. I'll often do an assessment and find out what they understand, and then if it's a new diagnosis, I will go over a lot of the resources that they may be eligible for, and then if they've had the diagnosis for a while, I will assess what resources the family has connected to, and then add additional resources as I come along with them, as I get to know, because I'm also learning to get to know what additional resources are out there in the community. And so I will link them to Social Security, help them through the process of applying for that, in-home support services as needed at Regional Center if they're 0 to 3. And then I also do mental health screenings. A lot of times I will, if the patient is 12 years or older, I will kick the parents out and have a conversation with the child alone just to see where they're at with their coping, if there's any depression, anxiety. Sometimes I find that sometimes my patients it's harder to talk when the parents are in the room, and they don't want to they don't want the parents to get upset. So I will talk with the child on their own and just see what's going on. And if I feel that they need additional support, then I will, and I'll ask the patient, is it okay if I talk to your parents about counseling? And I will suggest counseling as an additional resource. I do inpatient and outpatient. So if I have a patient who's come into the MDA clinic and they have been hospitalized, I will go see them also in the hospital. And also I look at the stressors. It's not just the diagnosis. There could be loss of work. Parents might need to be taking off of work to take their child to the medical appointments, or if the child is hospitalized, they have to be at the hospital at bedside. There's also just the stress of, how do I navigate the school system? What do I do? How do I talk to other family members about this, or my friends? What do I say? And that is one of the things that I help with parents in how to navigate those conversations. Because again, as I shared before, I know that it impacts the entire family unit. I also assist with getting support for school through IEPs or 504s. I often say to other members of my team that if I was just doing IEPs and 504s, I would be working all day, because I have found that I know there can be a lot of barriers and there can be a lot of pushback with the schools. And so one of the things that I do is I will help the parents navigate talking with the school about setting up the meetings for a 504 or the individualized education plan. And if there's any issues with the school, or the child is not getting the support that they need, then I will ask if it's okay if I call the school, and then I call the school and I talk to them about what I think should be provided, and see how we can work together to provide the best support for the child's academic needs. And I also check in. Bullying is a big one too that I ask all the time when I'm in the room with the family. I will ask, is there any bullying at school? Because now that we have social media and Instagram and Facebook, and I just want to make sure that that's not happening. And then if my patient is going to college, I will also assist with scholarships. There's a lot of scholarships through the MDA Foundation, and then also getting the child linked to the disability services on campus to make sure that they're getting all the resources when they go to college, and making sure that their academic needs also there are provided. I work with a lot of members of the team. I work with a dietitian, pulmonology, cardiology. The MDA comes, CureDuchenne comes, and also PT and OT, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and we all work together. And when we're in the MDA clinic, a lot of times the families leave and the patients leave, and then we all get together and we talk as a team about how our meeting went and if there's any concerns, and moving forward, where do we go from here to assist the family. I also like to address any barriers to care. I work with a lot of patients that are low economic. And I will check in on transportation. I know that that can be an issue. Also, housing, getting medications. If there's any barriers to insurance, I can't get my medications, or if the patient doesn't want to take their medications, I will sit with them and talk to them about that and find out what's underneath that. And I'm so very grateful to be doing the job that I do at CHLA. One of the reasons I'm going to disclose a little bit, and I sometimes do with my patients, is one of the reasons that I got into social work in a hospital setting is that I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis as a child, and I grew up in a hospital. And while I don't have Duchenne, I know what it's like to be in a hospital and you're transitioning from elementary school and then going through middle school and then high school and navigating all of that, the feelings that come up of insecurity or not wanting to tell your friends or the peers, and how to be in school and do your schoolwork and also take care of your health. So I'm so very grateful to meet with the families and the patients, and I love seeing them thrive and also helping them navigate when it's just really difficult. And so I am here if you want to talk to me after, and thank you.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, CureDuchenne, for having me, and thank you for sharing your morning with us on this panel. My name is Leona Filis. I'm the founder of Filis Law Firm over in Houston, Texas. I am here to talk to you about the challenges and the rights that you have with your families. I am the proud mother of a bright and energetic 11-year-old boy with autism and ADHD. I'm also the proud aunt of a boy with DMD. Over the years, we've witnessed a lot of challenges, and after many years of long discussions with families and friends, I've decided to focus my law firm on helping families with children with special needs. One of the first things that we talk to our families about is Medicaid waiver programs. Each state works with the federal government, and they provide several Medicaid waiver programs. Does everyone on here have their child on an interest list for a Medicaid waiver program? Or do we know what I'm talking about? Medicaid waiver programs allow for families to receive support and services for their children. Sounds great. You can have respite. You can have occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, reimbursement for home modifications. The problem is that there's waiting lists that are several years long. So I really request that everyone on Monday call your state representatives, call your Health and Human Services Commission, and find out about Medicaid waiver programs in your state. They should refer you also to local authorities so that you can receive benefits from programs from both the state and local providers. We also have traditional Medicaid. Now, many of us can't qualify for traditional Medicaid because of the eligibility requirements. You either have too many assets or income, and traditional Medicaid, up until your child turns 18, will look at household income. One of the waivers that is employed with Medicaid waiver programs is that they waive that eligibility requirement for income and looking at household income. They will just look at your child's income. Once you have qualified your child for benefits, you want them to preserve those benefits. So we usually talk to our clients about getting a special needs trust. Now, there are a couple of different types of special needs trust. There's the self-settled supplemental needs trust, and there's the third-party special needs trust. Which special needs trust applies to your situation depends on the source of the funds for which you want to put into that trust. Self-settled supplemental needs trust would be funds that you receive from, let's say, a personal injury lawsuit for your child, or child support paid for the benefit of your child. But most people are interested in the third-party special needs trust. When you have your wills drafted, you usually have everything going to your spouse, and in the event that they predecease you, everything goes equally to your children. We don't want that to happen for your child with special needs. We don't want them to inherit directly. We want the trustee of their trust to inherit. The reason for that is that if your child inherits funds, they can be disqualified for any of the government benefits that you've got them receiving. So if you've qualified your child for, let's say, a program called MDCP, Medically Dependent Children's Program, it's one of the Medicaid waiver programs we have in Texas. If a well-meaning grandparent leaves in their will inheritance for your child, having that asset will disqualify your child from receiving further benefits. So we recommend for families that have children with special needs to use a third-party supplemental needs trust in order to get them protected long-term. We also have something in every state called an Enable account. People have heard of 529 accounts, where it's a savings account for college. This is very similar. This is where people with disabilities are able to have a savings account and not have those funds disqualify them for eligibility for Medicaid and other government benefits. There are limitations. Each state is different. There's limitations on how much you can contribute annually. In Texas, you can contribute $14,000 to $15,000 annually. And only the first $100,000 in the savings account is protected from Social Security Administration from looking at those funds to see whether or not there's to be disqualified for government benefits because they have too much income or too much assets. We also talk to our clients about our children's future needs. Right now, your state recognizes you as the natural guardian of your child who is under the age of 18. When your child turns 18, your state will look at your child as an adult with all their rights and responsibilities. For some of us, our children will need us to continue in that role of natural guardian. But you'll need a court case filed in your county to have a judge appoint you as guardian over your child. Now, it is a legal proceeding. In Texas, for example, you can apply or start the process 6 months prior to the time that your child turns 18. You'll get something called a physician's certificate of medical examination. This is the legal evidence that you'll present in court to justify that there is a need for guardianship for your child. You'll have, in some cases, a court investigator come to your house. You'll have an ad litem appointed to represent the rights of your child. And this proceeding can take as long as 6 months, maybe a year, depending on the length of the investigation, to determine the need. Typically, this is determined by intellectual disability as well. Some of their children with Duchenne also have autism or intellectual disability. And the need for our parents to continue in the role that they're in right now, to continue when this child turns 18, is vital. However, there are lesser restrictive alternatives to guardianship. In some states, we have power of attorney, medical power of attorney. We also have supportive decision-making agreements. Your child, if they have capacity to understand the terms and provisions in a contract, then you should pursue this route when your child turns 18 to sign power of attorney over to you, their parents. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you.
Thanks, Leona. Actually, I don't need the clicker. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm Marissa Penrod. In a minute, I'm going to bring my friend and partner, Kelly Maynard, up here. I'm here today. When I have my lanyard on, it says I'm an exhibitor because we have a table over in the hall for the Family Assistance Program. It says I'm a speaker, which is obvious. I'm right here today. But my other tag says that I'm a parent. And that is what I'm most passionate about and most proud of. My role being here today is just like all of you as a parent of a child with Duchenne. So what I want to talk to you about today is really briefly my journey with my son with Duchenne and actually how it led me to be here speaking in front of you today. So I am a parent of 3 children. I have a daughter who's 23, a son who's 20, and a son who is just turned 17. And it's my son who just turned 17, Joseph, who has Duchenne. So when Joseph was diagnosed about 11 and a half years ago, I channeled my grief into action. And so what I felt compelled to do was to try to be a part of the solution. So I formed a nonprofit called Team Joseph, started raising money, and we funded research. And I felt good about what I was doing. We continue to fund research today. I was happy with where we were until Joseph's disease started to progress. And as our own personal journey evolved, and Joseph was struggling and needed a scooter, and then at the age of 12, he completely lost ambulation and needed a power wheelchair. At the same time, I was caring for my elderly parents. I was sending my daughter off to college. There were a lot of life transitions. And I was looking at how do I modify our home to accommodate this wheelchair? I was dealing with an insurance company, figuring out how to convince them that Joseph did indeed need all the features on his wheelchair. So I was looking at all of these issues, and I used to lay in bed at night and I would think, how do people navigate this? How do they navigate it if they don't have good health insurance? I am very fortunate, and I will say just lucky, that we have good health insurance, and Joseph's equipment was covered. I had a little bit of a battle, but not a significant one. I have a strong community. When I was doing a renovation to our home, I had people coming to me saying, what can we do to help? And I kept going back to, what do people do if they can't provide what they need to for their children? I was very fortunate in that I was able to choose the clinic that we went to. I was able to choose the doctor that we saw, but I know a lot of people are not in the situation where they can travel to a clinic, and that started to eat at me and keep me up at night. So I thought we look with great hope to the future in light of all the amazing research that's happening, and I believe that we're on the cusp of significant treatments and cures. But in the meantime, how do we take care of each other right now, today, in this moment? Because while we wait for a treatment, we all have to leave here today and we have to go home. And we have to pay our bills, and we have to do stretches, and we have to worry about nutrition, and we have to plan for the next doctor appointment. And all of that happens in isolation unless, as a community, we wrap our arms around each other and say, how do we help our community right now, in this moment? There's a lot with Duchenne, and we all know that, but I look at our panel here today and I think this is amazing that we have these resources. But we talk about genetic testing, and we talk about the potential of a clinical trial. We talk about grief and loss, and we talk about how to navigate. Our kids going to go to college? And sometimes I think the ship is sinking. I can't do anything else. Some days I'm just trying to figure out, what am I going to make for dinner? So how do we take care of each other? So my friend Kelly Maynard and I were talking one night, and she was sort of on a similar path as I was, and we were saying, there's so much So we started to talk about what are the gaps in our community. What does our community need? What did we personally need, and how can we use that to help other people? And we looked at things like, how do people get to clinic? Because I don't believe that the ability to take really good care of your child should be dependent on your socioeconomic ability. If we become a community of elitists where we can only attend conferences and we can only get to good doctors and we only have the privilege of considering being in a clinical trial, then we are doing this wrong. So what we decided to do is launch a program, and it's called the Duchenne Family Assistance Program. And the overarching theme, it's two things. And if you have stopped at our table, you'll see our brochure, and it just says, you are not in this alone. And the goal of the program is to eliminate stress and suffering for families. And we do that through a variety of ways. And I'm going to tell you very quickly what we do through Team Joseph, and then Kelly's going to come up and tell you what she does through her arm of the program. So the nonprofit I founded is called Team Joseph. We partner with the Little Hercules Foundation. Kelly and I both continue to fund research through our foundations. What we do through our Team Joseph arm is direct assistance to families. So if you want to go to a clinic and you need to fly to get there and you don't know how to do it, you call us. We help people with flights, we help with hotels, we help with car rental. If you need to get a van, I mean, how do people get $60,000 and $70,000 vans when sometimes you're just trying to buy groceries that week? We have grant down payment assistance programs. We have resources. We help piece things together for you. If you need a ramp into your home and it's just not something you're able to do, because your child is now in a power wheelchair full time, it does not mean that they should be confined to your home. They should have the same opportunities that everybody else. We help with ramps. Basically, we say, whatever you're looking for, whatever you need, we're here to say, we'll help you figure it out. The thing that we are most proud of is the only requirement to apply to our program is that you have a diagnosis of Duchenne. That is it. There is no income test. We don't ask you personal questions about your income. We trust people. We believe in the goodness of people to ask for the help that they truly need. And we say, how do we help you? How can we do it together? So in our Team Joseph arm, we focus mostly on direct financial assistance. So we encourage you to reach out if you need it. And then Kelly focuses on some access issues, and she's going to share that with you now and tell you what they do in her arm of the program. Thank you.
I'm actually going to stay seated because I don't want to fall in these stupid shoes. So if you don't mind, I'm going to stay seated because I wore the dumbest shoes to do this today, and the last thing I want to do on camera is slip and fall in front of all of you. So thank you for your understanding. So what we do on the Little Hercules Foundation side in our sort of divide and conquer approach to helping families get what they need to take the best care of their children and live their best lives is we've assembled a staff that is uniquely qualified and specialized in health coverage. We have, and I'll just quickly go over, what the experience of our staff. I'm quite proud of them, if you can't tell. So Mindy Cameron is our advocacy director, and a lot of you probably already know her. She's been in the community for a long time. Her son is 18 with Duchenne, 18. She used to live here in California, so she's our advocacy director. She has a background in communications and in journalism, and she's also a grant writer, which is sort of magic wizardry for a nonprofit. The other two employees that we have also are Duchenne moms. One of them is a nurse and worked for a health plan, a commercial health plan, before she came to work for us. And her name is Jen Shumsky. The other employee that we have is Amy Akins, and she actually ran the Medicaid waiver program in her county in Pennsylvania before she came to work for us. So when we have a family come to us and say, our doctor has said that this is medically necessary, but my insurance keeps denying it, Medicaid keeps denying it, we will help you, we will walk you through that process. We will do as much of that legwork for you that we can possibly do. Because the reality is that health plans, while they are maybe sympathetic to our situations, they don't really respond well to emotional pleas for a $60,000 piece of equipment. They want research, they want a letter of, medical necessity, and though that piece of it can be very technical. And so that's, and I forgot to say, for myself, when my son was diagnosed at age 5, he's 12 now, I was working in insurance regulation. I worked for the state Department of Insurance in Ohio. That's where we're based out of. We are a national organization. We also, the other really key piece that we do is we connect families with existing resources where they live. And on our website, both of our organizational websites, but also the Duchenne Family Assistance Program website, there's something on there called a resource finder. And it's simply, you just go in there, you type in your zip code. It will bring up a whole list of local, state, national, public, private, charitable programs and services that are available to you right where you live. And then from there, you can sort of refine them based on whatever it is you're looking for. But everything's in there. Copay assistance, utility payment assistance, all the food pantries in your area. So, just real quick, we, Marissa mentioned that if you're, living with, Duchenne is an expensive disease, right? And you're living with this disease and you are trying to just go to work and make sure that you keep your head above water and you have other children to take care of, you might not really be thinking about participating in a clinical trial if you can't pay your heat bill or go to the grocery store, right? And so what we do is we take a look on the back end of that resource finder, and it gives us really cool reports, and it allows us to see what our community is searching for and where from. And we look at that quarterly, so we can adjust our program if necessary, or the priorities in our program. And last quarter, the #1 searched item on our resource finder was food assistance. And it's even shocking, I thought I wasn't ever able to be shocked by anything anymore, but that kind of shocked me. So we encourage you to reach out to us. We encourage you to use that resource finder. It's not Duchenne specific. Anyone can use it. If you have other people that you think could benefit from it, please just pass that along to them. And I want to thank CureDuchenne for having us here this event. We've met with many families one-on-one in private sessions, and who are going to be reaching out and applying and helping. And if you ever have any questions, reach out to us. We're here for you.
That was fantastic. I just need to go to the next slide because this is great right now. Let's chat. Yay. Questions. I know lots and lots of information that was shared just now, but so needed, so fantastic. Who would like to ask a question? Anyone? The boxes are out there. Oh, we have one. Okay.
Oh, I love the boxes.
Hi, good morning, ladies. Thank you so much for sharing all your expertise with us. I have a question for the geneticist. When I got tested for my genetic testing, my son has a duplication in the second exon, but I was told that I was only tested for that mutation. Is that the process, and have you ever seen a carrier with 2 mutations? Because that always kind of worries me. It's like, okay, I don't have it here, but maybe I have another one. I don't know, because I was tested negative.
Right. So thank you for that question. So, in 30% of moms, you won't find the mutation, but that doesn't mean that I have no idea how old your child is or if you're planning future children, but there's still up to a 10% chance of this occurring, because even though the mutation was not seen in your blood or saliva, it could be in the gonadal tissue. So we call that gonadal mosaicism. Generally, there are some families, it's rather rare, where you might have two different mutations gravitating, but they're usually disconnected individuals who are affected, and it's pretty clear when you look at the family tree that it's probably not the same mutation. I would say that you don't need to worry about another mutation, unless you yourself develop symptoms that didn't quite fit in with what was expected. But generally, it's a good thing if you're not carrying the variant, and nothing more needs to be done. But in pregnancy, we encourage you to have testing, and there are many fairly non-invasive ways of testing for dystrophin mutations. Thank you for the question.
Another question down here? Oh. We're not tossing this morning too early.
So I've been tested, I'm not a carrier, but my daughter is 16, and when would you suggest that, or would you suggest that she be tested?
So thank you. You're bringing up a very important point. So generally, we don't test carriers until they're 18. As I had mentioned before, that there are some females who actually can manifest almost as severely as a male, or there's a whole spectrum, in which case you may want to test that girl. The chances are very small if you were negative of your daughter carrying a mutation. However, there is the 10% possibility of gonadal mosaicism, and so I would encourage testing, but at 18, when she can give informed consent, and there is free testing, through the PPMD program and other programs like Invite and Perk and Elma being the two leaders in the field. Yeah, thanks.
And I'd like to add to that, just from a parent perspective. I am a carrier, and my daughter is 16, and a couple of years ago when I started seeing Dr. Mammon, and my heart I need some help, right? And so speaking with him, it was like, we really might want to get her tested earlier. And she's very involved, and from looking at all the other components that we've talked about today, like we've really been talking through, and it was a burden she was carrying. She was worried about it, and so she was very informed, and she and I and the family, we made that decision to have her tested now, and so we did it. And yes, 18 is the standard, but I think it's in a family situation, like our family decided collectively to make that decision and have her tested now, and I'm happy to say she's not a carrier. And so it's a beautiful moment, and had she been, we were planning for her to have been a carrier. It's like plan for the worst, or hope for the best, plan for the worst. Is that the right saying? But anyway, so it certainly, it just gave us a direction. And also to have that control, like if she were a carrier, then we could have opportunity to intervene early.
Sure.
Like if I knew when Will was diagnosed that really standard of care, I should have MRIs, right? Where I was just having EKG, so would I have been a little more protected had I had that treatment sooner? So just.
And Tiffany, I also need to reinforce what I mentioned earlier about carrier women. So they need treatment, they need investigation in their own right. So, the echocardiograms, their muscle testing, psychological support, all of that, so that's not something that should be trivialized.
Mm-hmm. Do I just talk into this box?
Yes, you do. Where are you? Oh, there you are. Hi, Mindy.
Hi. I'm also a carrier, and I also have heart involvement, and I do feel like knowing that early. Well, I actually found out when I was in my mid-40s. But as I got older, I did develop cardiac symptoms. And I think, just wanted to tell you, there's a new movement called Remember the Girls.
Yes.
I'm a board member, and we are working as carriers of all X-linked genetic disorders as a group. The hemophilias are X-linked, adrenal leukodystrophies X-linked. So, we're working on these projects to kind of make the medical community aware that as carriers we can be symptomatic. We have a lot of emotional guilt type situations that are being addressed. And there's also, there could be some discrimination. I'm also with Little Hercules, but all the newborn screening and the carrier testing can also lead to discrimination with health insurance, life insurance, all these things. So these are big issues, and being a carrier isn't just, you're not just a carrier. There's a lot more to it. So absolutely. I think it's extremely important to get tested, because as our boys are living longer, we need to live longer. And if you've got a hidden heart problem, you need to know about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you, Mindy.
Very important point.
It was good to hear your voice. I hadn't heard you today. Anyone on the panel would like to jump in? I mean, or talk to each other. I love the continuum. I put this panel together. We did pretty good, right?
I definitely would make a plea as the second speaker about participating in clinical trials. There are a lot of trials out there, and they desperately need participants, and drugs will not be approved if they don't prove whether a drug works or not. And also, as was mentioned before, contributing to biorepositories, and I know CureDuchenne has made a point of making this material available to researchers, so that cannot be underestimated. Donate your blood, skin, your saliva, whatever, participate in studies. We really need your help.
I'd like to add something a point that I didn't make, and it's sort of an obvious point, but yesterday during the gene therapy symposium, someone mentioned that we're in a really watershed moment with these gene therapies, and we could be looking at a future where many of these diseases, not just Duchenne, that we're rewriting the whole future with that, right? And all of that research and all of that wonderful innovation means nothing if we cannot get it into patients. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we do what we do. And we are really trying to address those barriers when it comes to coverage. But, we've seen this, and we've been working kind of with the SMA community and with their approval of Zolgensma. Zolgensma is going to kind of be our microdis, right? And their Spinraza is kind of like our exon skipping drugs. And, we've seen payers come out and say, well, we're not going to cover Zolgensma because the child's doing fine on Spinraza. But they are two very different therapies. And so I just kind of want to make that point that, these challenges are happening, and they're incredibly stressful and, on our families. So it's important that we continue to educate the payer community about these gene therapies and how different they are. So.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelly. We have another question.
I have a question, actually. Leona, thank you for all of your information and your advice for all the families. It's really important. I was just curious, I may have missed it. When you're looking for an attorney that specializes in these trusts and assisting with the waivers, is there a title or a search word to look for so you don't end up with the wrong attorney?
Right, and that's kind of interesting that you asked that, because we have so many different areas of law, and you can find an expert in, let's say, family law or estate planning, but they may not understand all the different intricacies where you might have to worry about SSI eligibility and how that works in conjunction with your probate, your will with your wills, and then having the special needs trust. So we typically tell parents, when you're Googling, you can type in special needs, child disabilities, and legal rights for those searches. There's not yet a specialized area of law for disability rights when it comes to special needs. When we're talking about that area of law, I think it's not just one area of law. I have to explain to people it's all woven together, and it's great when you do find an attorney that has a personal connection, who may be a parent or a family member, who understands what you're going through and why you're planning the way that you are, and what you're seeking for your child and your family ultimately.
Is it state by state, or can you hire an attorney from a different state to handle these for you?
So for special needs trusts, those are nationwide, so it can be somebody from Houston,
So
Texas.
someone in California could call someone in Houston.
Yes, but for guardianships or certain areas of law, it does have to be from that attorney from that state.
Go ahead, Ashley.
I was going to say we get a lot of great patient referrals as well at Global Genes. We've had this question come up a lot. There are a few websites that we've vetted through that provide a list of different special needs attorneys and kind of that work with this. There's a few websites that we've been referred to that have shown, but it's by no means an end of all end list of those who specialize in it, but it's a great start, and it's sorted out by state. So if you are looking for someone in your local area, but I would encourage that, just like anything else as part of your healthcare, is to advocate for yourself and make sure that you are vetting these people and being open about what exactly you're looking for and what your situation is, to make sure that they're a good fit, just like you would for your doctors or any other healthcare or any other support you're looking for, to always vet these individuals before seeking out their service. But we do have a few references, so I'm happy to share my information with anybody who's interested, and if not, they can always connect with CureDuchenne. Tiffany has Global Genes contact. We'd be happy to share those references.
Let's just do it. Just share it with us. I'll share it with DFAT.
Yeah,
Let's just
exactly.
go on. Yeah, teamwork. Family. We have a question, Mindy. Oh, one up here. Sorry, I didn't see. Go ahead.
Yeah, a question about grief and loss. I facilitate a grief group in Oregon, not specifically to Duchenne. One of the things that came up was somebody had asked me, they're an aunt of somebody with it's a pediatric cancer. And they said, there's no support for aunts, uncles, grandparents, close friends. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yeah, I couldn't help them. I'm wondering what thoughts you have about people who are not the parents and the siblings.
So, as I said before, anyone can experience loss and grief. And I don't think that that's just limited to the patient or the immediate parents or siblings. It really can affect the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, even the friends and everything. And so I really encourage, it's a shame that we live right now in a world where we feel like the only support groups that are necessary are just for patients and caregivers, because that's really not the case. Everyone experiences the loss individually, and even though they may not be directly linked to them, they can still feel, I don't have children or nieces or nephews, but if my cousins, for example, were sick, I can still feel that some sort of loss and grief, because they're still family to me, and there's still this relation. Same with my own friends who I know have had other medical issues. I still feel the same thing because they're still close within my network, and to me, they're still family. My suggestion is that they reach out. There are support groups, and even though they're not a caregiver support group is a good place to start looking for those support groups. But I think that there are a lot of, you'd have to look for it, and off the top of my head, I'm not familiar with any. Maybe our genetic counselors and other social workers on the panel may know, but I think there are a lot of generalized support groups that are for loss and grief, though it may not be towards specifically pediatrics or specifically to cancer or specifically to their role in it. There are a lot of general, I think, loss and grief groups out there, but I also would really encourage that if they see that this is more common in their community, to, again, take hold of their own advocacy journey and take hold of their own feelings, and even think about maybe starting their own support group and saying, I am an aunt and there is nothing out there for me, but I can't be the only one experiencing this. I know I'm not, so why not make a general support group for those experiencing who are not the patient and caregiver? It's a way to help process your own feelings, but it also, again, that finding that ability to move forward, it lets them also reach out to those who may experience the exact same thing they're going through. Remember, grief is individualized, but you're not the only one going through it, and we go through it in so many ways. So I would encourage them to take action on it, or to also, if they're not ready, to reach out to maybe more generalized groups that are out there, and to connect with case managers, social workers who can provide maybe more resources into finding those type of groups.
Tiffany?
Yes.
We had a question from somebody in the audience.
Oh, great.
Are there any one-size-fits-all documents that can be downloaded to provide insurance companies to aid in coverage for specific needs typical to Duchenne patients, like if they don't want to cover therapy or braces or certain pieces of equipment, things like that?
So there are plenty of resources out there. The ones I can think of, the Patient Advocate Foundation puts template letters out there. We do not like that approach because there are, like I said, there's a technical piece to this, and payers want to know that if they're going to cover something, for example, a stander in a wheelchair, they want to know, a power wheelchair, they want to know that there is a body of research out there that says putting an integrated stander in a power wheelchair is beneficial in a clinical sense to boys with Duchenne. That's not all that easy to do. And so those are really tough battles to fight alone because, first it requires that your letter of medical necessity from your provider is incredibly persuasive and good. We've seen situations where letters of medical necessity are not good. So we encourage families and patients to be involved in this process. A lot of the times, this goes on behind the scenes between the provider and the payer. And the problem with that is you don't know, you've got one shot at this, right? Sometimes you get one appeal and it goes to external review. Sometimes you get two, and then it goes to external review. So we encourage patients to be involved in that process and know what's going on so they can see where the problems happen. So for that reason, if you want to do it yourself, plenty of families do it. It's a long process. It can last 6 to 8 months, and 6 to 8 months is a lifetime in diseases like Duchenne. So our goal is to get to a yes as quickly as possible.
And if I can just, as a physical therapist working in the home, working in the school, to piggyback on that, it's hard to do, like you're saying, like a one-size-fits-all, because it really has to be tailored to that specific patient. And the letter of justification that you're going to use for this child for the same piece of equipment is going to be different than for this child. So really, utilize the therapist, the PT, the OT, we're the ones that are a lot of times writing those letters of medical necessity, and even ask to see them. I mean, if your therapist writes one up, ask to see it before it's sent in, and see if you feel like there's anything that's missing, because the insurance companies most of the time don't really care about, does this make things a little bit better or easier? They want to know medical necessity. And that's what has to be in the letters. How is this going to medically improve this child's situation?
I want to add one more thing to that. Yes, you're absolutely right. So many orphan drugs, including, one of ours, is approved on the accelerated approval pathway. Payers, by and large, generally hate the accelerated approval pathway, and they will use the fact that it was approved on accelerated approval to deny it as experimental, even though the FDA says approved is approved is approved. We've heard this time and time again. The other thing that we see is, many families have more than one son or child with Duchenne in the family. You can get an approval for one child, same mutation, for a treatment, and then the other child will be denied. And this happens because these payers will look at the clinical trial data in the absence of having a confirmatory, phase 3 data. They'll look at the clinical trial data, and they will limit access based on the clinical trial profile, right? So if they're non-ambulatory, they'll automatically exclude them, right? Even though it's contrary to the FDA label. So, imagine, and many of you may have experienced it in this room. Imagine have 2, 3 children with Duchenne, and 2 of them get approved for a treatment, and the other one doesn't. So, actually, I love fighting insurance companies. For me, it's incredibly therapeutic, and my staff is pretty good at it. So.
Family strong.
Tiffany, do we have time for one more question? Or no, are we out of time?
It's actually more of a comment.
Okay,
and it's very
you have
quick.
7 seconds.
As our boys start working and going to college, I think these ABLE accounts are totally underutilized. So if you are making an income and you need to continue drawing your benefits, the ABLE accounts are a way to, I don't want to say shield the money, but you have to use an ABLE account to pay for living expenses, but that's rent, that's food, that's transportation. We have seen people use it for vacations if you can justify it as something about your health. And if your state doesn't have an ABLE account, and I think, Leona, you might be able to confirm, if your state does not have an ABLE account, you can go to neighboring states to open ABLE accounts. And I believe that most states do have them now. They are totally underutilized by our community as our boys become more independent. Yep. So don't forget that they're there, and that's the way you get around this $2,000 limit for Social Security benefits.
Yep. Yes. Yes.
Good point, Mindy.
You can go to another state and go ahead and apply and get an account in your child's name. And most states don't even have an extra charger for that.
Thank you. All right, thank you so much for our family panel.